Welcome to Your Ultimate Life podcast, where we help you break free from mediocrity and create a life of purpose, prosperity, and joy. Get your free video series at yourultimatelife.ca.
Oh no, here I am. Wrong camera. What? Oh dear. That's terrible. Wrong camera. Oh yes. I'm teasing. I do have some cameras set up on the side, and that was one of them, but I did it on purpose because today's episode is called Mistakes Are Motivation. And that wasn't a mistake because I did it on purpose, but I did it just to have a little fun. And the idea is this. What is a mistake anyway? Mistakes. It's such a, I don't know, it's such a lousy word for several reasons. First of all, the mistake. We use it in all kinds of ways that are completely inappropriate. What I mean by that is sometimes when a person, has a terrible thing that they've done, like someone falls off the wagon and, if they're an addict, so I've been that, and fall off the wagon and, maybe you don't like have an accident or hurt someone, but, it's pretty serious. Oh, I made a mistake. And we use the same words that, I tied my shoe wrong, made a mistake. So anyway, different kinds of mistakes. But I just wanted to talk about, I'm going to use the word mistake, and I'm going to use it in its broadest sense, okay? Some mistakes are really small, like I tied my shoe wrong, or I forgot to bring something to work, or, whatever, to bigger mistakes like I didn't stop all the way at a stop sign, okay, and then someone yelled at me, or I didn't stop all the way at a stop sign and I had an accident, or someone, gets drunk and has an accident and hurts someone. You can call and there's all kinds of other ones, thousands. You can call all those mistakes, and they're clearly of different magnitudes. So I recognize that we use the word mistake in its broadest sense, and I'm not excusing any of them or anything like that. So I just want to talk about mistakes and use it in the general sense of something I did not intend to do. So if someone is embezzling money and they're doing it on purpose, and then they get caught and they say, oh, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have done that. That's in a different class. I'm talking now about mistakes that are genuinely unintentional, and unintentional even if they have some serious consequences. They're genuinely unintentional. So you do something and a box falls down and hurts someone, that's still unintentional. All right. So let's go with that definition of mistake: an unintentional act or omission that has a consequence that was not good, from small to large. So let's use that definition of mistake, not an intentional wrongdoing, a premeditated or calculated piece of distrust or betrayal. We're going to leave that for another conversation. Mistakes are, let's leave them that. Unintentional actions that have some kind of a consequence. Okay. So that's why I say mistake. The word mistake is kind of a lousy word because it can mean all these things, and we sometimes minimize the consequences of intentional wrongdoing by calling it a mistake, meaning a bad lapse in judgment when there was a premeditation, another thing involved. All right, that's just sort of a preamble. Let's just set that aside and go with the definition of mistake. That's an unintentional thing that has a consequence that might be small or might be large. Now, so what? And I don't mean that in a belligerent way where you say, okay, I did that, so what? Where you're trying to be in denial or pretend that something didn't happen. I'm saying, so, what? I mean, what do we do now with this fact? You made a mistake. Well, one set of reactions to making a mistake is to fix it, to do the things that we can to mitigate the mistake, apologize or repair something or return something or buy a new one if we broke something. All those things are fine. What about when we can't really fix something like that? How do we make things right? Well, sometimes you can and sometimes you can't. Sometimes if someone's hurt or if it's a loss of, a loss of trust, not because it was intentional wrongdoing, but because, someone doesn't trust your judgment anymore because your judgment was mistaken and it had a serious consequence. So then let's answer the question, so what? Well, the what is this. First of all, make an assessment. What is the consequence of the mistake? Is there a physical consequence? Is there an emotional consequence? Is there a spiritual or energetic consequence? Is there a trust consequence? Is there a relationship consequence? Make an assessment. Now, this is assuming you want to correct or do something about the mistakes, because remember, this whole show is about creating your ultimate life, a life of purpose, prosperity, and joy. And I was just reading an entry in a WhatsApp chat I belong to. Someone was talking about quantum alignment and having every day be joyful. And I thought that, we hear lots of that kind of stuff, especially if you do a lot of self-development, personal development stuff. And that's all wonderful. And I am not diminishing that in any way. But even so, mistakes, meaning things you do that don't turn out well, or mistakes you make a judgment that's poor, those things happen anyway. So you make an assessment of the consequences. You also need to make an assessment of your own motivation to repair the mistake. Sometimes we don't care. Those mistakes will haunt you. Those mistakes will haunt you energetically, because if you know that your mistake hurt someone physically, financially, emotionally, spiritually, and you did some harm, that will stay with you. You can call it karma, you can call it whatever you like, but what happens is, if I do that, I have now become a person who doesn't care, who no longer cares about the consequences of mistakes that I've made. If I brush it off or brush it under the carpet or pretend it away, it's going to be a small cancer in my effort to create a life of purpose, prosperity, and joy. Now, this idea of mistakes or motivation gets all tied up in forgiveness also, because forgiveness, remember, we defined that some episodes ago, as no longer letting events from the past have power in the present. So there is an element of forgiveness, but that comes after you do what you can to mitigate the mistake, to fix what you can fix. Now, you and I both know there's some things you can't fix. If you lie to someone who's close to you because you think it's a good idea, that's in the intentional wrongdoing category, first of all. It's not really a mistake. It was an intentional omission or commission, because you either thought you'd be embarrassed, or you were trying to protect somebody, or you thought it would be better if they didn't know, or some other horse crap that we tell ourselves. Truth is always appropriate and essential. Anyway, so let's go back to mistakes are motivation. First of all, if you want to fix a mistake and you want to allow it to be motivation, assess the damage. Physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, financially, whatever the right measure is. Then decide what you can and can't do about it. Some things you can fix and some things you can't fix. If I break someone's gear, some kind of gear, then I can replace it. If I break someone's heart, I can't really replace that. I can apologize. I can fess up and say I did that. It was wrong. It was a lapse in judgment. It was really bad. I thought it was going to be okay, and it wasn't, whatever the right language is. But simply mumbling some words isn't enough, because trust, when it's broken, is not easily restored. So I have to do what I can to restore trust, not just say some words of apology. Now remember, this is all in the context of trying to create a life of purpose, prosperity, and joy. If I leave behind me a battlefield, a wake of broken things, physical or spiritual or emotional, and I don't fix them, and I don't do what I can to fix them, then I can't achieve a life of joy. I can't be at peace in my heart. My conscience won't let me, and neither will yours. We can pretend that it does, but all we do is sear our conscience. We burn our sense of right and wrong up, and we pretend that we don't believe we've made these mistakes. Well, that's not the way to your ultimate life. So here's, this is not a moral lecture, but it's one from deep and painful experience. So there's several pieces. One, you assess what you've broken, and you replace it or fix it if you can. Some things take a long time to fix, and some things can't be fixed. Now, here's where this tie-in with forgiveness comes. If I hurt someone's feelings and I apologize and do what I can to fix it, then it is not mine anymore. If the person who I've offended chooses to stay angry and seek retribution, and I'll never forgive you, and that sort of thing, I cannot fix that. And this is where it moves into forgiveness, self-forgiveness. I made a mistake. And I said a minute ago, I made a mistake. So what? Well, the so what means something is broken, and it's on me to decide whether to fix it or not. I'm assuming, because you're trying to create a life of purpose, prosperity, and joy that you and I create with our gifts and talents by serving and loving, that's all we've ever talked about in all these hundreds of episodes, then that means you want to fix stuff. You want your slate, your conscience, your heart to be clear. So do I. But we can't make others, we can't control how they're going to feel. So you do what you can, and then you must forgive yourself. You must allow yourself to move forward and move on, or you'll never be able to add good to the world in the fashion and manner that you could otherwise. You simply can't. Now, this makes another gigantic assumption, and that is that you don't repeat the behavior. You know, if you apologize because you got caught, like politicians do, I'm generalizing, but many people do. They only say, "Oh, I'm sorry, it was a lapse in judgment," when they get nailed, when it was truly a calculated attempt to hurt, defraud, or otherwise rip somebody off, financially or otherwise. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about genuine sorrow, genuine apology, genuine repair, and then you have to let it go. So the so what? So you blew it, right? That's the structure of this. Mistakes are motivation. So if I do something and it's wrong, I blew it, I don't want that in my karma, in my energy. I don't want that. I want to fix it as best I can. I do what I can to fix it in the different realms. I meant, spiritually, physically, emotionally, mentally, financially, whatever it is. I fix it if I can, and I apologize and everything else, and then I forgive myself. Now let's get to the mistakes or motivation part. Because after I've done that and I've cleared it up the best that I can, there's another piece of work to do, and that is, how did I do that? How did I, and this is not an invitation to drama and self-abuse or self-loathing and, oh, I shouldn't have done that, and, some endless parade of negative language. I have a client, I had a client, it's not an active client, but had a client who had some issues in the family. And for many months, much of the conversation was about, I shouldn't have done this set of things. Look at the terrible consequences. And and I don't think they said these words, but the feeling was, I'll never get over this. I'll never get past it. Well, that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And you never get over it and you never get past it. Not because you can't, but because you choose not to. Now, remember, this is disconnected from whether someone accepts your apology or not. This is after you have acknowledged and done what you can to repair a mistake. Then you forgive yourself so that you can learn and continue to add good to the world. So the assessment I'm talking about here, secondarily, is, gee, how did that happen? What was I missing that made me make that mistake, that helped me with drove me to a poor judgment, a poor assessment, and an incorrect action, or an action that had these consequences I didn't mean to have, didn't want to have. Okay, so that is the second assessment. First is the damage assessment. Then you do damage control, and I mean genuine damage control with apologies and repair. Then you look at yourself and say, what did I do or not do that left me in that vulnerable position. I'll give you a personal and deep example that has to do with my own addictions. There were various times in my years of addiction with different substances when I would vow, I'm going to quit. I'm going to quit this. I don't like me like this, etc. And I would sometimes for many days, I remember having 50 days in a row once. And then I fell off the wagon. Well, so in addition to mitigating whatever the consequences were of falling off the wagon, there's a different assessment. And that is, what did I do or not do that let the pressure or the coping failure build up in me so that whatever the trigger was caused such a failure? One of the things that I have examined was how in this context of addiction and everything, is emotional outbursts, people getting angry, and then they hold it inside or they do something negative, and it's a cycle, right? There's a cycle there. There's great apologies and stuff, and then pressure builds until there's another acting out. That is a very typical cycle in abuse cycles, where someone will do something wrong to someone, friend or family or whatever, and then they feel bad, they apologize, and they do stuff to quote try to fix it, but foundationally they haven't done this piece of what is in my life that brings me to the place where I act out like that. Often that kind of research, and it depends on the mistake that you make or the failure, it involves professional help. Okay. And I can't remember what class. I know it was in one of the times I was in rehab. That was one of the classes we had, because of often addictions with many people involves abuse of spouse or others, not to mention abuse of self. And so one of the professionals that came in gave a class on that, cycles of abuse. That's where I saw this. But anyway, if you don't get help, and this is true of any kind of mistake that are not trivial mistakes, the kind of help you might need is different. But if you don't get help by looking inside yourself and examining things, or for larger things, getting professional help, then you will very likely make the same mistake again. Right? I mean, we have sayings for that. Those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. That's on a societal scale, and we're talking here on a more individual scale. But it's exactly the same thing. Those that don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it means, on a large scale, if we don't examine what went wrong in other societies and other governments and other situations, we're going to make the same mistakes and cause the same kinds of wars and revolutions and bloodshed and negativity that were repeated in the past. Well, if you have a propensity to make mistakes, to have poor judgment, lapses in judgment, then you need to get the kind of help you need. Now, if it's a small thing, the kind of help might just be different scheduling. Let's do something small to start with. See, you're always late for a meeting and you just perpetually are late. Well, you need to examine, first of all, your commitment to meetings. Why are they committed? What is it in you that makes it okay for you to inconvenience everyone else while you are late? Maybe you don't love yourself. Maybe you need to examine the relationship you have with your word, and you might need help with that. That's one of the things that I used to do, but I don't anymore, but I work on also with clients, is the value of their word. Like, what does your word mean? And this is in any kind of repeated mistake where you make mistake and you seem to keep making the same mistake. Well, then that means there's something wrong or out of order in the setup. What is the situational setup that makes you do this same kind of mistake? Another example, besides being late, maybe you have a habit of saying unkind things, gossiping or sniping. When I was a teenager, we used to have a stuff we called a cut low contest. And it was a sort of a game we played as teenage boys who could say the unkindest thing. We called it a cut low. I don't know why it was called that. And my mom pointed that out to me one day, that my language was like that, and she asked me about it. And we didn't embark on some repair work then, but it stuck with me. And I thought, what is it about that pattern that makes that important? And later I realized, an attempt to make yourself feel good, or, put others down to be built up. And I was riddled with massive depression and insecurity. So that was an escape for me. But my point in relaying that example is, no matter what you want to change, if you're making a mistake, especially if it's repeated, the need that you have or I have is to go back in the setup and see what there is in the setup that drives me to that same mistake, that same behavior, that same activity. In the addiction, my own addiction process, I started recognizing earlier and earlier triggers, uncomfortable emotional situations that drove the need for escape, that built pressure, feeling bad and feeling angry or frustrated about myself until I wanted to, escape. So that's just a brief conversation about examining mistakes. If you make the same mistake over and over again and you're happy to live there and you don't care about the consequences, then everything I've said doesn't matter. If you're making mistakes that you're uncomfortable with, then it's time to go and get the help you need. You're worth it. You're important. You're valuable. You have a huge contribution. And here's my own personal experience with that. I've made a ton of mistakes, and episodes are full of them as you go back and listen. But I had 3 failed relationships and addiction problems, and, I was a pathological liar and did all kinds of stuff for decades. When I was 52, I had some experiences that made me consider my life more from a different perspective, and I started over. And so for the last 17 years, I've been working on that carefully, and I've done exactly all the things that I'm talking about, including small things, being on time, only saying things that are true, just monitoring my words. And one of my PTAC statements is, I am my word. I speak only truth. I do what I say. I am who I seem, with simplicity, transparency, and integrity. And I put that one in there for me because I wanted that to be true, and I was working on it being true. And that, putting it there, reminding myself of that every day, made it real for me. And now it is true. And if it, for any reason, is even slightly not true, I fix it right this minute. I get up, fess up, clean it up, and recommit. That's kind of my little saying if I make mistakes or if I fall from any of my own commitments, because I want to be in complete integrity, like I said. So here's what we don't do, and what I used to do also. When I made a mistake, I would launch into this emotional attack on myself. I'm not good enough. I shouldn't have done that. And, much, much worse language about how bad I was and worthless and everything else. None of those behaviors lead to the ultimate life, a life of peace, purpose, prosperity, and joy. So ignoring mistakes doesn't help. Blaming others doesn't help. Pretending them away doesn't help. Minimizing them, it's not that bad, doesn't help. Lying about them doesn't help. All of those things add salt to the wound and are like drinking more poison. The only thing that mitigates mistakes is to get up, fess up to whoever is appropriate, to yourself or others or both, clean it up to the extent possible, and recommit. Now, you may use other words for each of those steps, but that's what I do. And that recommitting part includes forgiving myself for being human so that I'm no longer carrying baggage of shame and guilt and negativity, right? Shame and guilt and negativity don't help you. They don't help you create. They don't help you build your business. They don't help you fix or nurture relationships. Certainly don't help you be happy. So I want to tie together this whole mistake thing in 2 ways. One is there's a big piece of this forgiveness involved. And I have a book on forgiveness. If you haven't read it, it's called Forgiveness, A Journey of Courage to a Place of Freedom and Power. The second thing I want to make sure you understand is that mistakes are human. You blew it. So what? You got to go on. You've got to get up and fix it and move forward. Or you languish in the land of, I'll never make it, I'll never do anything. And you relegate yourself to a life of misery or hiding anything but purpose, prosperity, and joy. You are a divine being, as I said. You are loved. You are intended to love and serve. And you are loved not only by your Creator, but by me and by others. You'd be surprised how many people care about you, who you are, what you do, what you say, how you feel, what you're trying to do. Now, the most important thing is you're going to make mistakes, big ones and small ones. What we can't do is allow mistakes that we make, little ones or big ones, to make it so we hate ourselves. Self-loathing is a poison. It is a fatal poison. During my years of addiction and lying and all kinds of failures as a human, when I was in rehab or talking to any counselor, they always ask you the same question: what's your drug of choice? And I used to answer with whatever I thought, was appropriate at the time, and would list various substances. And sometimes I would list them all. And sometimes I would say things like, it doesn't matter, anything that's handy that makes me unconscious. When I thought about it, what I realized is my drug of choice was self-loathing. That was my real addiction. Not my drug of choice, but my addiction. My addiction wasn't to any substance. They were the handy distractions. The addiction that I had was self-loathing. I needed to hate myself because of my mistakes. I had made mistakes, big ones, small ones, and some of them in that other category of willful negative behaviors. Doesn't matter. I'm not saying depression or whatever. Yes, I had decades of untreated mental illness, and so that does what it does. But with the consequence of all of that in my life was that I hated myself. And I felt like I needed to. And consequently, the manifestation of that was self-sabotage. Every time things would happen that were good or positive or uplifting, I had to find the negative side, the dark side. And if that was hard to do, then I'd go ruin them. I would trash the party, trash the relationship, trash the situation. Well, then that would just repeat the cycle. See, I don't deserve it. I would ruin it. And over again, we'd go. So here's the point of today's podcast. Mistakes are inevitable and they are motivation. If you examine what was the setup for the mistake, whether it's a small one like being late or a big one like some kind of addiction or other kind of behavior, there's a setup, there's a process, there's a reason. If it's repeated for you, find out. It is critical to get the help you need if you care about fixing it. Because if it were easy and you could do it on your own, you'd already have it done. This is one of the most fun things I love about coaching, is to be able to help people who are honest, who honestly want to change things in their lives. One of the biggest barriers that we have is our habits. We get married to these ideas that I can't do this. It's over my pay grade. No, I'm not good enough. I'm not capable. Those stories come from the accumulation of mistakes. It doesn't matter what's happened before. The only thing the past is good for is to teach us something, and it helps us know or brings us to where we start today. As a final point, in my book, Forgiveness, A Journey of Courage to a Place of Freedom and Power, I talk about a Hawaiian process called Ho'oponopono, which is 4 statements that are not applicable in every situation, but here they are. I'm sorry, please forgive me. I love you, I'm grateful. And I don't have time to go over them thoroughly, but in the book, Forgiveness, I talk about that. And they are a powerful combination to help us with self-forgiveness and to help us avoid mistakes. Because when we realize we are really all connected as a human family, my mistakes hurt you and hurt me. Your mistakes hurt you and hurt me. We are truly built to love and serve. And when we remember that, mistakes are motivation. My mistakes, my past mistakes motivate me today. Mistakes I made yesterday in just tonality or choice of words or not paying attention to someone or not loving deeply. They're motivation for me to do better, be better, lift more, bless more, love you more. I want to close with the invitation. I invite you to reach out and connect with me. I'd love to get to know you. I'd love to understand how you're adding good to the world, what your goals are, what you're trying to do. And if you haven't gone to www.yourultimatelife.ca, I invite you to go right now. There's good stuff there to help you create your life of purpose, prosperity, and joy. Even creating now your ultimate life.
Open your heart and this time around,
Thank you for listening to today's episode. We hope that you take it deeply into your heart and decide for yourself how you can create anything you desire. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to this podcast and share it with your friends. As always, we'd love to hear your feedback and topic suggestions. Until tomorrow, this is Your Ultimate Life with host Kellen Flukiger.
stand with your heart in the sky and your feet on